Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about laws and continuing our tutorial series, and we're going to be talking about which economy laws are best, and also some background considerations regarding laws and the economy and these sorts of things, ways to evaluate these laws themselves. Before we go into all that, we're going to just do a quick rundown of which ones I think are best without any explanation. I think Laissez-Faire is best for economic system. I think for trade policy, free trade is best, but it's close between the three, the upper three. For taxation, I think proportional taxation is best. For colonization, I think exploitation is best. I don't think it's particularly close. For policing, I think dedicated police force is best. And for education system, I think public schools is best. And for health system, I think private health insurance is best, and it's not particularly close. Okay. So, before we get into it, we need to talk about just kind of how you look at your economy in general. And a good way to think of your economy is that there's a giant pie. And you are splitting the pie between your own pops as well as all government expenditures. And you might ask, well, why would you want to give money to your pops? When your pops are wealthy, it drives up standard of living, which has a few very, very large benefits. The first one is it drives migration. Currently in the game, migration is extremely overtuned and is an extremely strong mechanic, and you want to take use of it. And so a large part of what you want to do is you want to slowly drive up standard of living. This will also have a secondary effect, is it will create loyalists, and it will get rid of radicals. Something to note, a good reason why you want loyalists is the increased approval rating. This will allow you to unlock larger bonuses. Now, forgive me, this is going to lag because this run's a little laggy, but I just want to show you the bonuses of the trade unionists real quick. When we take a look at industrial organizers, if I'm not mistaken, it gives a 10% manufacturing throughput bonus. This is a really large bonus. You know, it's going to give 20% if you get the clout above 20%. And this is a big reason for wanting to increase loyalists. Also, it makes it easier to pass laws without getting revolutions. You might notice we have a revolution off to the side. I might have to scroll, but we do have a revolution brewing in this country. And then also we have workforce ratio. Both of these are very, very strong, and these are reasons for wanting to increase the standard of living, both migration and approval. So a big part of it is you're deciding how you're going to split this pie. Okay? When you are looking at your balance, the way you need to calculate it is you need to add the balance to the investment pool, and this is the amount by which your government is taking in or putting out. And so here, it's not the case that we're losing 4.6 million, we're actually losing around 6.5 million, but we don't really care that much because we have 6 billion gold reserves and 2.3 billion in investment pool transfer reserves. And so this is not a big deal. Let's go into this a little bit. We'll talk about this more with taxation, but generally speaking, a good way to think about it is you're thinking about how you want to extract money from the population and how you want to give it back. So, for example, if we increase the taxation level, generally speaking, taxation level, while a very effective blunt instrument, is regressive. So it affects the lower rung populations more negatively. The exception to this is if you have in the taxation system, if you have graduated taxation, it doesn't really affect the lower rung populations quite as much, and it more affects the rich population. But let's go back into this. And so this is regressive. It's your blunt instrument. Consumption taxes allow you to tax particular goods. So when you tax luxury goods or sin taxes, these will mainly take from the richer pops. So generally speaking, I prefer to extract money via consumption taxes. Now you can also lower government wages or raise government wages. These provide bonuses in terms of approval rating, and also they enrich the pops. So not only are we, when we're paying extra here, we're getting extra approval rating from the literati, trying to unlock their bonuses, and the Petite Bourgeoisie, but we are also making them richer, which generally gives them more political power. So same with military wages. So this is kind of how you think of extracting money. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about taxation. But this is how we extract money. How we spend money is, generally speaking, you take a look at government wages, you'll notice we're spending a ton on government administration, and that we should be spending a ton on construction centers, or a relatively large amount on construction centers. Yeah, we're spending 7.36 million on construction centers. And a good way to think about these sorts of things is, as far as military goes, military is useful for building up for obvious reasons. You can go to war, you can conquer stuff. Generally speaking, Government administrations, you kind of just want to build up to the institutions you want, and the big one is construction. In my opinion, you can think of construction as your growth rate of your economy. This is what makes the line go more up. Obviously, you have to build strategically, but it is a game about building. Here we have a very nice amount of construction in 69,000. So we can build anything we want quite quickly. In fact, this is way overbuilt. But what construction does is it just allows you to grow the economy because everything is based around buildings, and construction builds more buildings, and it also drives demand. Just very quick. It's not really, it's showing you per level, but here if we hover this, you'll see, for example, all these goods is increased demands on behalf of the construction for the construction goods, and you'll see it's costing us 1.8 million, and we're just eating it. Another way you can also stimulate your economy is by adding extra subsidies. So you'll notice here, we're subsidizing the war machine industry, so you can make particular industries profitable as a means of injecting money into your economy. So that's how you can think of injecting money and also extracting money from the economy. And the big question is, how do you inject and how do you extract such that you are maximizing value as much as possible? One very important thing to note is you do not want to be running negative bureaucracy, because when you are running tax waste, the pops don't get to keep the tax. It's just gone. It's just disappeared. So taxing your pops less will enrich your pops, and this is good. But having tax waste by running negative bureaucracy, it's just net loss. Okay, so this is kind of just a way to think about the economy. It's a giant pie. You're deciding how much of it goes to the government, how much of it goes to the pops, how it goes to the pops, and how you extract it into the government. And this is kind of the lens through which it's useful to evaluate economy, and it also helps for just kind of looking at these laws. Now, in terms of economic system, all these laws, for the most part, determine how the investment pool is generated, and this is going to be a big deal. And it is, in the early to mid game, this is an enormous source of revenue for you to be able to build a huge amount of construction. You can only use the investment pool, that's this, for paying for construction goods. It doesn't pay for wages, it just pays for construction goods only. But luckily, since the biggest thing you really want to be building, since it drives economy, is construction goods, is basically like a free tax. Now, let's take a quick look at traditionalism, which is where a lot of economies start out, or a lot of the more backward countries. This does not give any investment pool transfer. You can still get investment pool transfer if you go into here and let's click the Industrialists. If the Industrialists are happy with you, they will give job creators will be activated at 10%, which will give flat 10% capitalist investment pool contribution. There's a similar bonus under Landowners. In this case, we have Scholar Officials, where it gives, I think, 10%. Now, traditionalism is really bad. You want to generally get off of traditionalism. In order to do anything but agrarianism, this will require you abolishing serfdom, which is kind of an early game struggle for a lot of, developing countries. Now, let's go into it, though. Interventionalism will give 5% aristocrats an investment pool contribution, 25% capitalist investment pool contribution, and very importantly, it will allow you to subsidize any kind of business. So the big advantage of interventionalism is it allows you to subsidize anything. Also, the investment pool, funds in the investment pool can be used to build agriculture, plantations, ranching, manufacturing, blah, 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 etc. This is the only one where it will support everything but government buildings. Government buildings cannot make use of the investment pool transfer. So, for example, if you're building a government administration, it won't be paid for. This one allows you to inject money in as flexibly as possible. And also, in terms of interest groups, a lot of interest groups are kind of a fan of interventionalism. You'll notice no interest group opposes it. The trade unionists and the industrialists support it. And so the benefit of interventionalism is usually it's kind of a nice little bridge when you can't pass Laissez-Faire, which is better. Now, if we take a look at agrarianism, a big plus of agrarianism is you can pass it when you still have serfdom. What this will give is 25% in aristocrats and investment pool contributions, quite a bit more than the 5%. It's actually quite strong if you have a very agrarian society. Generally, I don't like having an agrarian society, but if you start out with one, it's good. You can only subsidize agriculture, ranches, plantations, infrastructure, and trade centers. So you can only subsidize agrarian things, basically, and you get a investment pool contribution from the aristocrats. This is kind of okay. It's much better than traditionalism. If you can kind of get an easy swap from traditionalism to agrarianism, you kind of want to go this way. Now, the best one, the big hitter, is Laissez-Faire, which gives 50% investment pool contribution, 25% loan interest rate, which is very good if you want to do deficit spending, which often you will want to in the kind of early to mid game. Not too much, though. You want to be a little bit careful. And it will give 50% capitalist investment pool contribution. So, what this effectively means is when capitalists are making extra money, you get like half of it into the investment pool. This is huge. It allows you to construct a ton. Remember, the investment pool contribution isn't just free money. It's only free money for construction goods. So, if your economy is all types of messed up and you can't even afford the base, fixed national expenses, let alone afford to construct, it can kind of run you into some problems. But generally speaking, you want laissez-faire. The downside of laissez-faire is you can't subsidize anything. You can only subsidize railroads and infrastructure. This is it. And so that's the downside of laissez-faire. But generally speaking, this 50% investment pool contribution is just too big a deal to really, it's not close in terms of what this is. And also the loan interest rate is a pretty big modifier. If you stack this modifier a lot, what it does is it allows you to spend into a deficit. Now, when you are in a deficit, that is when you have negative reserves, what you are doing, you pay an interest rate. The people you are paying the interest rate to, let's click on here, are going to be the owners of these buildings are going to be who you're paying the interest to. And so you are borrowing money from their cash reserves, and the maximum you can borrow is the entire cash reserves of everything in your country. And so when you're borrowing money to them and paying interest to them, it actually enriches the capitalist, which further increases the amount you get in terms of temporary, or the amount you get into the investment pool from the capitalists. Since they are investing 50% of the money they get, you will actually, when you pay 100 in interest, 50 of that is going to get paid back into the investment pool. And so this allows you to, spend to construct a whole lot. And if remember, you want to think of construction as your economy growth, this is huge, up into the point where more buildings aren't really useful, which is kind of where we're at in this run, specifically. Okay. So the last is command economy. Now, command economy gives 25% authority, 25% taxation capacity. You'll notice these are actually very strong modifiers, but then you'll notice something missing. There's no investment pool contribution. And so what you do is you trade investment pool entirely, and then there's a third thing. Subsidies are mandated. You have to do subsidies. In terms of, in theory, command economy can be quite strong. In practice, it's really, really, really bad because it is really hard to not accidentally overbuild industries. In my estimation, once you start getting 4 to 10K construction or even beyond that, it is very hard not to accidentally overbuild an industry. When you are subsidizing every industry, when you overbuild, it's catastrophic, because what happens is you just hemorrhage a ton of money into the overbuilt industry. When you're not subsidizing it, the industry just underemploys or just keeps the employment low, and it takes care of itself with an equilibrium. So command economy requires you micromanage everything. In theory, command economy could be quite strong. If you are into micromanaging, 4 to 10K construction or whatever, and checking the profitability of every building, this can be very strong. The authority, the tax capacity, both nice, but for the most part, it's best to just expand construction as much as possible. When you start getting really, really high construction, command economy is not, practically speaking, tenable to keep up with. I think if they start updating some of the automation in the way you can automate how expansion is occurring, command economy might get a bit better. But at this juncture, I think is really bad for practical reasons, not for theoretical reasons. Subsidies mandated will also notably drive up standard of living, which is a nice thing when you are trying to siphon off pops. Okay, so that's kind of economic systems in a nutshell. Laissez-faire is generally best because the huge investment pool contribution. Okay, let's talk trade policy. Now, isolationism is the worst. Most countries do not start isolated. What this does is it allows no trade, and the trade-off, and also you get minus tech spread, increased tax capacity, and also a little bit of authority. it disables trade routes. It's really bad. Trade is the backbone of this game. The reason we have isolationism in this run is because who are we supposed to trade with here? But what you kind of want to do is, okay, so free trade is best because it gives trade route volume and decreased trade route bureaucracy cost and trade route competitiveness. But it prevents you from doing encourage exports, encourage imports. For the most part, I think you kind of want to encourage. I don't think you really want to protect your industries too much. As a player, I think you can make your industries competitive enough that you don't have to worry about the AI dumping goods into your market and ruining your economy in terms of making your buildings not profitable. I think you can make your buildings profitable as is, so I think free trade is best. But what protectionism and mercantilism both allow you to do is to extract tariffs. I think tariffs are a poor way of extracting money from your population. I didn't even talk about tariffs, but that's another way you can do it. And so what you can do is you can tariff exports and tariff imports. Now, what mercantilism does is it allows you to focus more on imports, if I recall, and protectionism allows you to focus more on exports and protect your own local industries. So, for example, we have a high tariff here, a higher tariff here on imports with mercantilism. And so just as you think of it in terms of base tariffs versus export tariffs, so it's going to be easier to export goods when you're on mercantilism and harder to import goods. When you're on protectionism, it's going to be even Stevens on these. And then for both of them, if you really want to import or export a good, you just click prioritize, and it's going to completely eliminate the tariff in regards to where you want it. I think I might have thought of this wrong. Let's see, 10% tariffs on imports and exports, 15% on imports, and 15% on exports. So when you, for example, encourage exports on mercantilism, it will be basically impossible for someone to dump goods into your economy. Generally speaking, I kind of like protectionism a little bit more than mercantilism, but they're kind of interchangeable because what you're going to do is you're going to want to pick all the goods you really want to keep protected, and you're going to, encourage imports on those, and you're going to pick all the ones you want to export, and you're going to encourage exports. Basically, you're going to turn it into free trade, but not free trade, is how I have played in the past. So at this point, you'd just rather have free trade. Okay, so that's kind of trade policy in a nutshell. Taxation. Generally speaking, for most economies, proportional taxation will get you the most money. Let's quickly look into it. Consumption taxation does have the benefit of minus bureaucracy cost, population cost modifier, and decreased consumption tax cost. Now, so for any of these, you kind of want to think in terms of how you want to extract money from your economy. If we really wanted to stimulate the economy, we could even switch back to proportional taxation, to consumption taxation, and every single tax system will have the exact same consumption tax rate. And so they're all 20%, which is based on our current levels, I believe, which is right here. So for example, if we increased it here, it would be 50% consumption tax rate, and this taxes all the goods you have in your consumption taxes. So consumption-based taxation, most countries don't start with it. Generally, you don't want to switch to it because this is the only way you're extracting taxes is from the consumption tax. It will give us a minus revenue of 28 million, which I suppose we could do, but it would basically just turn off taxes except for consumption taxes. Generally speaking, you can kind of tailor the way you want your economy a little bit better with consumption taxes, but you're just not making enough revenue. For land-based taxation, it taxes the people who own land. Generally speaking, this will be kind of one that's easy to swap off of because the landowners are in favor of swapping off of it. So generally early on, you want to swap over to per capita taxation. What it does is it gives land tax, income tax, and consumption tax. And this gives land tax, per capita tax, and a higher income tax rate. So you will generate more revenue from per capita taxation. And so generally speaking, this is kind of an early game transition you want to make. But importantly, it's tax, a huge portion of it is based off of the land tax, which is collected from the peasants. Here is really a large part on the land tax, so the peasants won't like this very much. And the income tax rate is really where you want to start getting, is because as you start stimulating your economy, when you have a high income tax rate, as this standard of living starts to go up, this will make you more money. Also, if you have, let's say, a really high standard of living, but you don't have one of these later taxation systems, which tax income, you will start having a hard time, because remember, standard of living drives up all your government wages. You'll have to pay more for government wages because government wages are based on the average, and you'll have to pay more for military wages, and you will not be accruing more revenue on the basis of having a higher standard of living, have a higher, national income. When you have a higher income tax rate, you will generate more revenue as this goes up. So generally speaking, you want to move towards the lower levels. Now, per capita taxation just gives like a flat tax per person. It gives a per capita tax, and it decreases the land tax, which the land tax does not affect people in industrial areas. So land-based taxation can be kind of okay if you have an agrarian society, but you're still going to want to swap over. Now, proportional taxation, notice, increases the income tax rate even more from, we have 4% here, 10% here, 15%, and also gives dividends tax rate. These dividend taxes will tax the owners of the building based on how much they're earning. Now, this is going to start, like, between this and the investment pool transfer. If you have an investment pool transfer, so if you have, let's see, where is it? If you have Laissez-Faire, you're getting 50% investment pool contribution. If you have powerful industrialists, you're going to be getting another 20% investment pool transfer. And so you're kind of already capturing a lot of the money. You're going to get another 20% from the capitalists. You're going to be capturing a lot of the money already from, the owners of the building anyways. Generally speaking, for most economies, proportional taxation is going to pay you the most. And this gives you the most flexibility in determining how you're going to inject money back into society. A large part of what we're doing here, for example, with our government wages being so high, is we're paying for a ton of government administrations, which is allowing us to have a lot of institutions. And this is one way we're injecting money back into the society. But when you extract a whole bunch through the proportional taxation, it also allows you to lower tax rates, which increases legitimacy as well. And you also get decreased radicals from standard of living decreases versus having a high tax rate with a less extractive tax system. So you kind of want to have the tax system to be as extractive as possible, and then you lower the taxation level as much as possible, rather than having the taxation system, be less extractive in general. So, for example, we would extract less money with land-based taxation or per capita taxation, but then we might have to have a higher tax rate. And so it's, again, the way you want to think about it is how you are extracting and how you are injecting. So we want to have the most extractive tax system so that we can have the least extractive tax level and also have higher wages for government officials. Okay. So proportional taxation, the difference between this and graduated taxation is graduated taxation decreases the income rate tax and it increases the dividend tax. It doubles the dividend tax to 30% and it decreases the income tax from 15% to 10%. Now, the reason graduated taxation often doesn't pay a lot is if you have a really high average standard of living. What will end up happening, what you really, really need is, okay, so this is not the best example because our upper strata is slowly being deleted because we switched to council republic. But the bigger the difference between your lower strata and your upper strata in terms of the standard of living, the more profitable graduated taxation will be. If you choose to make your economy extra stratified, like, one way you can do this is through huge deficit spending. Another way you can do it is by having, poor laws, which will give less political power to the poor people, and also just generally enacting stuff that really helps keep so for example, if you have more discrimination or you have slavery, these types of things will also keep the wages of the lower strata low. And so if you want to have a really stratified economy, then graduated taxation will be better because it will tax the dividends and it will less tax the income. As this number starts to become closer to the upper strata, which will normally be higher, proportional taxation starts to become better. In my estimation, you actually really want to increase standard of living, the average standard of living, in order to drive migration, which is a very important mechanic for getting more workers. And And so because of this, I think proportional taxation is best, because I think you should build an economy where you're trying to increase the standard of living of the lower strata, rather than having a really stratified economy where graduated taxation would be better. However, when you start getting into the super late game and you start having, as low tax rate as possible, no consumption taxes, and government wages super high, and you can still have 69,000 construction, stuff like this, you can think about switching to graduated taxation as a means of giving money back to your the people in your society, because it will generally generate less revenue. Here it generates more revenue somehow, which I'm not sure exactly how that works. It's only 820k more, but it must be because we switched over to Council Republic. Let's not. I clicked the wrong button. So if we go into who owns some of these buildings. So we have Council Republic, which forces worker co-ops, which makes machinists and laborers the owners of the building. And it also increases the number of owners. And the machinists and laborers are pretty rich right now. So we would actually extract more on graduated taxation. So maybe this is a swap to make in this particular run. But generally speaking, for most economies, I guess it's a little bit different when you switch Council Republic. This might become better. You want to stay on proportional taxation because it extracts the most money, for which you can now inject into the economy the ways you see fit, by perhaps enacting all the institutions or whatever. Okay. So that is, in a nutshell, taxation. Now, for colonization, the way you need to think about it is you just have to go exploitation. The exploitation gives really big bonus, and that's the 10% throughput bonus in unincorporated states. Generally speaking, so you can decide to have... You could also do, I suppose, no colonial affairs if you want to do resettlement while you're colonizing and then swapping back to no colonial affairs. But there's no colonization taking place currently in this game, but we are still doing colonial exploitation. And the reason why is for the 10% throughput bonus in unincorporated states. It also gives lower subsistence output in unincorporated states. What this will do is it makes it so that the subsistence farms give less, which means that you can employ people more easily out of the subsistence farms, so it is easier to kickstart employment in places with a subsistence output. It will slightly lower the average standard of living, at least in these states. But what it does is, kind of super late game, you reach a situation where you have, in your incorporated states, you have all the industry, and in your unincorporated states, you just have a bunch of rural stuff. When you have the 10% throughput bonus on the rural stuff, you just get more hardwood and softwood, for example, because if we take a look here at our throughput, we're getting from economies of scale, Russian taiga forests, and from colonial exploitation. If all you're going to do in a place is build rural stuff, you really want that 10% bonus, throughput bonus to all your raw natural resources. This is the really big reason why. You can look at the starting wages and the subsistence wages thresholds as being negatives. However, for the most part, these people will just migrate to your main place if you have, migration laws that allow this type of thing. And also, if you're going to employ them and they start getting paid more anyways because these buildings are super profitable, you don't really care. So if we take a look here, we see in the coal mine, the average annual wage is 7.2. If we click on an incorporated state that has a coal mine, it's a much higher wage. But if we look at the average standard of living, it's still quite high over here. If we wanted to increase the average standard of living, we could switch to colonial resettlement. But I don't think it's worth losing the 10% throughput bonus on unincorporated states. I think this is really big. Okay. For policing, no police, big advantage of no police is you don't have to pay for the institution. Okay, let's go next. Local policing, a lot of countries will start off on local policing. It gives minus 100% state penalties from turmoil. I believe it gives this as more than any other one, yeah. So the benefit is you get the biggest reduction in state penalties from turmoil, and it gives a ton of political strength to the landowners. In our case, it's the scholar officials. Generally, this is regarded as a bad thing, so this is kind of why you don't want local police. Dedicated police force gives a different type of bonus in that it gives minus radicals from standard living decreases. I think this is better than, having 100% state penalties from turmoil, because the radicals will give approval rating. Eventually, when you get enough radicals, it actually drives up turmoil. And so, okay, you could just completely eliminate the bonus, or you could just get rid of the radicals in the first place, but the radicals giving negative approval, again, is going to make it harder to harvest the bonuses from your interest groups. Again, this takes forever whenever I click on it because the lag, because this run has 69,000 construction, but, these bonuses are quite good, and it is easier to unlock these bonuses when you have a lot of loyalists and few radicals, and this is kind of why you want to look at it from that perspective when you are thinking of, which policing you want. For militarized police force, this will give increased mortality, it will empower the armed forces, which is the Red Army in our run, and it will decrease radicals from standard living decreases, and also decrease radicals from discrimination. So in order to kind of evaluate this, you need to actually think about when you want to discriminate. Generally speaking, you don't want to have a discriminatory society. The reason why is migration is just overtuned and is super good for attracting pops. But if you do want to have a discriminatory society, this law, militarized police force, is actually quite good because the decreased radicals from discrimination is pretty big. You might notice most of our radicals here, I think, no, they're not mostly good discrimination, but a good chunk are coming from discrimination because we are stuck on freedom of conscience for all of eternity because we can't swap, which now we're discriminating on religious grounds. If you want to have a state religion and you want to have, the ethno-state, these types of laws, you want to run that, militarized police force gets good because it's going to deal with discrimination. If you have, total separation and multiculturalism, you have no discrimination, so this isn't giving you any extra bonus, and it's instead just increasing mortality per turmoil, which is just bad to have. Also, if you get a place with a bunch of turmoil, you're going to have a huge mortality increase. It's kind of just how you think about it. If you're going to have a discriminatory society, militarized police force is better. I haven't done it too much, though, so I don't know if it gives really negative events or something like this. There is an event that comes along a ton when you have dedicated police force, which allows you to decrease the institution, and in exchange you get approval rating. I always just decrease the institution, because once you decrease it, you can just increase it back, so it's kind of whatever. But okay. For education system, no schools, primary benefit is you don't have to pay for the institution, and then these are all give education access, but they give something else. So, religious schools will give plus 100% conversion at max level, and so, for example, you could actually run state religion, and then multiculturalism, and then also run religious schools, and you would convert everyone to your religion, which would help deal with the discrimination, while at the same time, benefiting from multiculturalism in regards to culture. Okay, this is one thing you can do. It's actually a reasonable strategy if you want to go just, state religion and not the other stuff. For private schools, this gives access to education based on wealth, which, in order to, if the average standard of living is above 25, I think that's the way the math works. No, if the average standard of living is above 20, this will actually give more education access. So the reason for doing this is to have the absolute max education access. So if you have a very, very rich society, you can switch to private schools and this will be good, especially because the benefit of public schools is that it increases assimilation and it gives education access. So actually, private schools is better than... It's been a while since I've kind of taken a closer look at this. Private schools is actually better than I thought, because once you get over 20 standard of living, it starts to look much more appealing, because our lower strata would have more access to education with private schools than they do with public schools at this current juncture. What you get from public schools is you get assimilation. So if you wanted to, let's say, have total separation and then ethno-state, this would allow you to convert your pops in order to decrease discrimination. So I'm actually going to change my evaluation. I think private schools is conditionally best, but public schools is also pretty good. You'll notice generally speaking, you have higher approval and endorsement of public schools than private schools. But, okay, for private health insurance, it's kind of very similar to how schools work. Again, no health system. A good way of, thinking about it is you don't have to pay for the institution. This is why you would do this. Charity hospitals increases Confucian scholars' political strength and gives the flat decreased mortality. Public health insurance gives the flat decreased mortality without increasing the political strength of the Confucian scholars or whatever religious group you have. And so, generally speaking, the primary advantage of charity hospitals is you can enact it early. You don't need certain research in order to do it. But unless you are trying to go extra religious, you just want public health insurance instead. And then private health insurance, again, calculates based on per wealth, which as you get a richer and richer society, this is going to decrease mortality more. So as you have a rich society, private on both of these becomes better, but public is quite good early. Now at this point, we can't swap over to private. But this is kind of a way for evaluating it. So really quick, I'm just going to go through it again. For economic system, I think Laissez-Faire is best. This is largely because the investment pool contribution is way bigger, and also the loan interest rate makes a difference and allows you to deficit spend a lot. When you deficit spend, you start paying interest, but you pay the interest to the capitalists, which will further increase the investment pool contribution, allowing you to construct a whole ton. And as you construct, you will actually expand, the limit on the amount of credit you can take a little bit at a time. This is a very strong mechanic. So I do think Laissez-Faire is best. For trade, I think free trade is best. Often I find myself, encouraging imports and encouraging exports in protectionism and mercantilism such that it just kind of resembles free trade. And I think you as a player, if you play intelligently enough, you won't fall victim to your industries being good dumped on. And so this is the primary reason why you would want mercantilism and protectionism. And I don't think making your businesses less profitable is a good way of extracting wealth. In terms of thinking about the pie, I don't think it's a good way for extracting wealth from your pops. You want the industries to be more competitive. This will allow them to pay more wages, which will drive up standard of living, which will drive migration, all these sorts of things. You want the free trade. Okay, unless you are the entire world's economy, in which case isolation is best. Might even switch off of isolationism, though, because people really hate it. But okay. Taxation, for most economies, proportional taxation will yield you the most money. You want to have the most efficient taxation method as a means of extracting money from your society so that you can, decrease taxation level and increase government wages and increase construction, all these sorts of things. By having the best, most efficient taxation level, this allows you to do this in the most efficient way. You build up the size of the pie, you extract as much as efficiently as possible, and then you give it back more efficiently. You could have a worse tax method and then fewer institutions, and less construction, but this isn't what you want. Graduated taxation will be will generate more revenue in highly stratified economies, and perhaps Council Republic. I haven't looked at this too much once I've swapped over to Council Republic, but it might just make more money in Council Republic. For colonization, colonial exploitation's best. It's not close. The throughput bonus is just huge. The tension decay, I didn't actually talk about this too much, but tension is actually something you want because it causes native uprisings, which allows you to colonize the whole place at once. And this is a pretty big deal. There's basically no reason to not go colonial exploitation unless you are just trying to decrease the radicals you get as you colonize and you just... okay. I think you colonize faster with exploitation than resettlement. For policing, if you are going to crack skulls and have either, ethno-state or state religion, then militarized police force will be best. Other than that, dedicated police force is best. I think the decreased radicals from standard of living decrease is a better modifier than, the state penalties from turmoil modifier. And also, I don't think you want to have the 50% landowner strike, so this is why dedicated police force is best. I've actually changed my evaluation after taking a closer look at it. While making this video, I think private schools is probably best, but public schools is a very close second. You increase assimilation. This assimilation does not matter at all, though, if you're multicultural. And so what you can do is if you are going to go multiculturalism and freedom of conscience, then you want private schools. If you are going to go just one, so let's say we are going to go state religion, Then you want religious schools, because this will convert people to your religion, so you will not have to deal with the discrimination. If you wanted to go just ethno-state, where is it? Where is it? Where's Harvey Dent? If you wanted to go just ethno-state, in which case public schools would be best. Generally speaking, it will be easier to get pop support for public schools, and public schools will provide more education early on into the game. But once you join the once you gain the economy up quite a bit, and have a higher standard of living, it will switch to private schools. I think during this run, public schools actually just would have been entirely better, pretty much the whole time. And the reason being is our standard of living did not really get this high until kind of recently, and we have all the tech we want. I think we are missing some... No, we're not even missing the military tech in this run. And so we just would have been too slow to get the standard of living such that private schools would have been better. But okay. For health system, I just think private health insurance is best, because once you get over a certain rate, you know, it's going to be... This gives 25% mortality. This gives 1.5% mortality per wealth. I don't know the math off the top of my head, but at a certain threshold, that's somewhere around like the high teens /20. At 20 average wealth, you will get 30% decreased mortality per wealth, so roughly 17-ish will be the break-even point where private health insurance gets better than public health insurance. The reason to go charity hospitals is if you want the religious group empowered. That's the only difference between charity and public. And of course, no health system allows you to pay less for the institution. This has been a quick rundown of all the economic systems I think are best, with a slight revision on my part on kind of looking at this now that I've taken a closer look, because the assimilation is not useful if you have multiculturalism. So in this run, we are actually planning on switching back to religious schools if we can, which we can't. The people hate it. And the devout don't even support it. Man, the interest groups that the China starts out with are just wild. Like, the Confucian scholars don't support the Confucian. They do not support anyways, that's kind of something for another run. This has just been a short review of the economy. Again, you want to think of it as a pie, and you are trying to figure out the most efficient way to take money away from your people, and then trying to figure out the most efficient way to give money back to your people. And these laws kind of help you do it. Several of these are just institutions themselves, you know, the bottom three, which are a means of giving back money to the economy. And so hopefully this was helpful and informative. I will be doing human rights. I will try and remember to move over my camera for that one. And then after that, I will be kind of taking requests as far as tutorials go. I think I'm going to be doing incorporated versus unincorporated, this sort of thing. Hopefully this was informative. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed it. It does help out, and have a good one.